I was going to talk about lost causes today, but I'm just going to veer a different way. And so you'll have to excuse me if I didn't really change my sermon text, but I'm going to probably end up going in a different direction. I didn't want to have to type out a whole manuscript, and forgive me for that. But I do have some lost cause stories. I do want to read them to you. I have 3 stories, and I didn't change them because I thought they were pretty funny. And not that Jesus doesn't speak to the lost causes of the world, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about suffering in the world, and I'm going to talk about our own understanding of where our call is in that suffering. The first one is about a man in New Orleans who broke into a home and he stole jewelry and he stole some season tickets to the New Orleans Saints game. Well, the man, of course, was arrested on the following Sunday because he was sitting in those seats and he was wearing the jewelry that he stole. Some people never get it right, do they? Then there was this other gentleman. He was 21 years old, and he saw these little kids around this police car. And he saw the policeman was showing how the police car all works, all their electronics. You know, they have so many electronics now, and the kids were all excited. So he decided he wanted to go over and look too. And so he was asking questions, and the policeman said, well, give me your identification. I'll show you how this works. He handed him the identification. Next thing you know, his name pops up, and he's wanted for robbery 2 years before that, and they immediately arrest him. Some things seem like lost causes, don't they? And then the last one was, and these are all robberies, I don't know why, but there was 2 people that robbed a bank in Pennsylvania, and then that wasn't bad enough. They rubbed citric acid all over their faces thinking that the monitoring system, the bank security system, wouldn't be able to recognize their faces if they had citric acid already rubbed over, and of course they were arrested right away as well. Jesus meets the lost causes, but I don't want to talk about that. You know, my husband bought me a Kindle a couple months ago, and he didn't tell me, he surprised me. And I saw it on my debit card, and I'm thinking, Amazon charged me $200 for something. And I said to him, we got this charge from Amazon. He goes, I bought you a Kindle. I said, oh my gosh, well, I didn't really want a Kindle. I like a book, okay? I like a book. And I like electronics as far as I can use them. Well, that Kindle is really much my best friend almost now because it's my walking library. And there's a reason why I'm telling you this. And when I'm looking for illustrations for my sermons, I type in something story and I get books. And I go out on Amazon and I say, okay, buy me now. And so I have this walking library with me, and it's the greatest tool. I just have to tell you, I was really skeptical about it, and it sat in my desk drawer at home. And I would open the drawer, and I'd see it in there. I'd never take it out, but once I'm hooked. And I remember that T-shirt that I showed, Lead Me Not Into Temptation, a bookstore. And I have to be real disciplined with this. And so I started putting things on my wish list. But I want to tell you, I read a book review in a magazine recently, Marcello in the Real World. And I was so captivated by the story about this young man that I had to go out and download the book on my Kindle. And it's a fiction book, but the story is so filled with compassion that I had to put that in the service today because Jesus is so compassionate, and sometimes we don't understand. There's a line. We don't understand. We have sometimes boundaries about that compassion. This Marcello in the Real World, he had a form of autism, and he had Asperger's syndrome. He was 17 years old, and he attended a school for children with special needs, and he was always able to thrive there. His family was affluent. His father is an attorney, and the mother is a nurse. And he never was outside of his comfort zone. The father never really wanted to recognize him as autistic. He always wanted him to step into a normal life. He always wanted him to pretend he wasn't autistic or had Asperger's. So the father said he's ready to start his senior year at his school. And the father says, I want you to go to public school this year. Well, he's really frightened. He doesn't want to go to public school. He said, you know what, you've been sheltered your whole life, and you need to learn about the real world. Marcelo does not want to learn it that way. He already has his plan. He's going to finish his senior year at his school, and he's going to work in the stables there. He loves animals, and he loves working with the horses. And he has it all planned out. And the father says, okay, I have a deal for you. If you come and work in my law firm, and you work inside the real world and follow the rules, because the father says the rules are complicated. Success is measured different in the world, the father says to him. Then if you come and you're able to operate in my mailroom, in my firm, in my law firm, I will let you choose the school you go to. He's nervous. Marcelo's nervous. Now I want to tell you, Marcelo, because he's on the autism spectrum, and I know this from Joy. You know, there's this big spectrum, and your child can be, you know, high functioning, they say. You can be on that spectrum someplace. But he's not the same as us. He has a hard time reading people's facial expressions. He doesn't understand slang, and he doesn't understand the ways that we communicate other than just plain and simple communication and language. And like all autistic children, he has a special interest, and his special interest is God. He even has a mentor who's a rabbi, and he loves to go to worship, and he loves to read about God, and he loves prayer, and he studies holy books. So he goes to work in the mailroom, and he finds all these relational dynamics, and I'm not going to go into that, but if you have an opportunity to read the book, I invite you, because it's a really compelling book. Anyways, he sees the ways of the world, and it's just almost comical, and the way that he learns about people. But one day, he goes to the fitness club. His dad takes him to his fitness club, and his dad sees another attorney from another firm, and they're opposites in this one case. His father's firm is representing a company that made windshields that were supposed to shatter on impact, but they weren't. The other attorney was at this fitness club, and he's representing somebody that was injured because of the windshield. Marcelo's not sure he understands the conversation, and it's kind of masks, but he knows that his father is hiding something from him. And he feels uncomfortable with it, but he's not sure why or what. So he's working in the mailroom, and he gets assigned, instead of in the mailroom, he gets assigned to a young attorney who is working on that case. And it's a case, well, there's many cases, but there's one case in particular. And there's a box marked trash. And he's going through the box because he wants to make sure that he hasn't made a mistake, because he wants so much to make it in the real world so he can go to the school that he wants. And he's going through the trash, and he's trying to make sure that he doesn't have anything important in there. And he comes across a photograph of a woman that's disfigured. Her face is disfigured. And he looks at her, and it's repulsive to him, if he even understands what that means. But he sees the face is just even hard to look at. But he begins to look in her eyes. He says she has these eyes that are asking these questions. And he gets all these emotions, but he doesn't know what they are. He said he knows he's experienced them before, but he's not really sure. What are they? Where are they coming from? And he says then he remembers. Because he thinks those emotions, at first he thinks those emotions are his autism. He says, I see other students at my school they overreact and they take things differently. He said, but I wanted to make sure that wasn't me. And he stares and stares in the eyes of this photograph, and the young woman is no more age than him. And he has these emotions, and he doesn't know what to call them. And here's what he says. And the book is in the first person, so it's him telling the story. I close my eyes, and in my mind there appears the portrait of Jesus the Abba kept when he lived with us, his grandfather. And in the middle of Jesus' chest, there is a red heart. And around the heart, there's a crown of thorns. A flame of fire shoots up from the top of the heart. And one day, Abba saw me looking at the portrait, and he said, that's the heart of Jesus. It shows how he feels for us. And then he took the picture down, and he sat beside me on the bed. He said, the thorns are his sorrow for all that we suffer, and the flame is his love. He said it was the same emotion that he had when he saw that photograph. And so he had met a young woman in the mailroom. She was like his supervisor there, and she showed him the ropes, and she was kind and considerate to him. And she asked, he asked her about the photograph. What could this be? What is this? She says, what do you think it is? Well, I don't know, but I can guess. And the young woman is surprised by how bright he is, and how even when he's not claiming to have intuition, is intuitive. I think it's from the windshield, he says. He says, it seems like her eyes are asking me a question. The eyes are questioning me. This is what he's saying to the young woman. Her name is Jasmine. Jasmine, it's a question. What kind of question? Can you tell me what the question is? I'm not really sure, he says. There are no words for it. Did you ever have a question like that? There are no words. But if you tried to put it into words, Jasmine says to him, what would that be? What would that question be? And then he says to himself, because he's always having these conversations in his head about what he thinks. And he says, is there a way to articulate how I feel or what it is I'm feeling? And he says, it seems like a really long time passes. And said, all of a sudden, he says, I guess it would be something like, how do we go about living when there is so much suffering? How do we go about living when there is so much suffering? And he says, does that question make sense to you? Is that the type of question that anyone ever asks? Jesus asks us the same question. How do we go about living when there's so much suffering? Jesus confronts us with that every time we open the scriptures and watch his compassion. How are our lives patterned around helping the suffering? What do our daily lives look like? You know, I went to Katie and Kyle's wedding, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to remember that. Because more than once in the service, they talked about how they wanted to make the world a better place. That was powerful to me. I can't imagine what they're going to accomplish as a couple together. Marcelo is learning so much about the real world, so many things that he didn't know that he doesn't like, his special interests are in God, and there's this compassion that wells up inside of him he's never even felt before. And he sees the way people handle other people. Handle them. They assign him this office, and he said, well, whose office is this? There's pictures all over it. The woman says, well, this is so-and-so's office. But when he comes back, he's going to be fired. Fired? You know, she goes, gone. No, he doesn't understand. She has to explain. What does that mean, fired? He wasn't measuring up, she says. He was too soft. The pieces start falling together for Marcelo. And he's learning about the real world. How ironic it is when Jesus always steps out in the margins to minister. But we have somebody that we deem marginal that's ministering, this Marcelo, that has more compassion than some people in this real world. And he shows the people who God is. That's tough for us, isn't it? I read this and I'm like, oh man, it hits me right in the face. And I was thinking about how difficult it is to show compassion in suffering. I think part of it is, for me, and maybe for all of you, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. You see the suffering and you're not sure how to move forward. I got to tell a joke. There was a woman who saw a man laying on the ground. He was in terrible condition, and she didn't know what to do, and she remembered she had first aid. So when she went home, she told her husband, I saw this man, she was telling him the story, and he was laying on the road, and he had this terrible condition. And I didn't know what to do, and then I remember I had first aid training. And she said, and so what I did is I sat down on the curb, and I put my head between my legs to keep from fainting. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. I mean, I think part of it is we just have to be willing to want to. You know, because God doesn't call each and every one of us. We don't always have the same passion. But when you see the suffering, you think, God, how can I be a part of that? How can I help that suffering? I was thinking about, I think about the teachers. I know Gina and Kathy talk about some of the children that they see. And my daughter's a teacher, and she does too. And she talks about the children, and they talked about the children and how they came to school. And how as teachers, they had to enter into the place that's suffering. They had to enter in bringing them clean underwear, something so basic, bringing them clean clothes, washing them. Suffering. And God puts them in front of us, and we live it out. And Jesus is like that today. Jesus is on his way to rest. Oh my gosh, I get that, right? Some days you just need to rest, the do-nothing day. Jesus is on his way to rest, and people are around him wanting healed. He doesn't want to. He knows he needs the rest, but he can't deny them. And Jesus takes rest a lot, don't get me wrong. But sometimes the Spirit compels us that we have to enter in. Sometimes the Spirit says it's for you, not for somebody else, not for some agency. And don't get me wrong, I'm very glad for all the agencies that help the people who suffer. We have to be willing. For Marcelo and for Jesus and for all of us, we can't help ourselves. You know, he kept looking in her eyes. Jesus kept seeing the suffering of the people around him. And that's how we are. That's how Jesus wants us to be. And it's not easy. Christ is here, and here we are. And all we have is Christ as our strength. Christ helps us move in that direction. And we move out of those places that are familiar. For Marcelo, totally unfamiliar. Even though it was his father's firm, he was on his own. His father decides that he's got to do it. And he does. And honestly, I'm not finished with the book. I'm sorry. But I will be to be continued. But I jumped over so I could see some of the things that were going on. For Marcelo, he steps out of his own place of comfort into the margins of his life. These are his margins. These are his places that aren't comfortable, where he's somebody that's used to schedules. He's somebody that tells him how to experience. He had to be taught everything, where some things are intuitive for us. How do we go about living when there is so much suffering? I kept reading that question over and over again. And he goes in and he begins to teach them about the kingdom of God. Not so much in words, but he confronts them. He confronts the way they are. How can you? Why would you? Who are you to do this? And he comes face to face with who his father is, and it's tragic for him. His father isn't exactly who he thinks. It's hard. Jesus, the scripture says today that he teaches them many things. Jesus is always teaching us many things. And we can teach others as well through our own words and actions, like the new Church of the Brethren vision. But you already knew that. To be courageous disciples in word and deed. I think a lot of times we need courage just to tell our testimonies, honestly. It's not easy. And I got to tell you, Burl and I were confronted with this issue this week. We had to go to Kosciuszko County for something, and we decided we were going to stop and have something to eat for dinner. And we had this server, and the restaurant was slow, and she said, "Oh, this is the slowest I've ever seen this restaurant." So we have this opportunity to have this conversation with her. And she starts to tell us about her life. She's living in a battered women's shelter. Oh, my goodness. And she's a victim of domestic violence more than once. Oh, my goodness. Okay, I can't eat, and we're just sitting there, and we're so compelled by the story. We're just sitting there listening to the story, and she tells us this story, and honestly, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. I could have probably put my head between my legs so I wouldn't faint. But seriously, God places people like that in our paths. And I say, I could leave her a real big tip, and walk away. I just couldn't. And it was like, I felt like Marcelo felt. And you're staring in her eyes. And I say, "God, what am I supposed to be doing with this?" And I said, "Well, where do you go now? What's next for you?" She said, "I just need to find a place to live." She said, just a room would be okay, because I don't make a whole lot of money here, but that would be good for me. If I could find somebody that's renting a room. So, I'm like, okay, all right. And so I'm praying about this because I can't get this young woman off my mind. And so anyways, I go home and I think, okay, God, what am I supposed to do with this? What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? And God says, do what you know how to do. Do what you know how to do. Okay, what do I know how to do? What do I know how to do? Okay, so she lives in Kosciuszko County. I don't even know anything about that county. Why didn't she live in Elkhart County? It would be so much easier for me. So I get online and I start typing women's groups or women's ministries, because I want to hook her into a good church first. That's what I want to do first. I want to find a good church that nurtures her, and I'm going to trust you, God, that you're going to send me the right church. I get an email right back from an Episcopal church down in Warsaw. We would be honored to help her. I'm like, oh my gosh, well, this is It's too good to be true. And so I set up a date, and Burl and I go down, and we go and meet her. And, of course, we don't meet her at the shelter because it's not to be said where it is. She trusts us. She even says to us at the restaurant, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I'm thinking, I know why. I know why you're telling us this. And God is placing this young woman in our path, and we don't know what to do. Anyway, so we go to this church, and we're listening. I can see she's so anxious. And she almost looks manic. She looks like she's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Seriously. You could just feel it off of her spirit. And they're doing wonderful ministry there, but she says to us, I wish I could go to your churches. Oh, no. Okay, well, I say to her, would you want to move? Yes, I don't have anything holding me here, and I don't have any family. We knew about our family, but when we went to the place, the Church for Ministry, she told us that she had a little girl that she had to have her mother, who she's been estranged from. She's estranged from her family. We could call her a lost cause. Her family deemed her a lost cause. And she was battered as a child by her father. You can see how that could go, where that goes to, how that leads to people's where they are now, where she is now, And I said, okay, if you want to move to Napanee, well, we're going to help you do it. I said, God, I don't know how this is going to work. She said, I'm going to get online. She says, we have a computer at the shelter. I'm going to get online. I'm going to start looking for jobs. That's what she said. I said, well, Burl and I will work on and over here. And, for us, we're not sure. We're just not sure. We're just taking one step at a time. But I called my neighbor who lives right behind me, who's the head of the chamber. I said, I have this special circumstance, and she needs a job, and I need your help. He said, well, I'm going to be at the fair all week. I said, give me some numbers. And I'm going to start calling people. So that just happened on Friday. I don't know where that's taking us. But let me just tell you. When you start to enter into the suffering of the world, and Jesus could tell you this, there's always a risk. There's always a risk. There's going to be a risk for Burl and I, probably a risk of our free time, maybe our privacy, I don't know. The risk that I care for, I'd rather give her a huge tip and walk away. It would be easier for me to give a huge tip and walk away. But God was compelling me for more, and I didn't know what to do with it. It's hard. It's hard to know what to do in the midst of suffering. And when I'm confronted with that question in that book, how do we go about living in the midst of the suffering in the world? The answer is we go day by day. And the risks are there. We have to have courage because we don't want to lose the things that we cherish. But really, the question is, if we don't do it, what do we lose? That's the question, right? If I don't do it, what am I going to lose? I imagine I'm going to lose a great deal. And I'm not going to give that chance. So anyway, we have communion today. And in that communion, we enter into that suffering as we enter in with the body of Christ, as with Jesus. Christ died and suffered for us. Not that we have to die and suffer, but every time we give a little bit of something that's valuable to us for Christ, we die a little bit of our own flesh, our own self, and we step into the kingdom of God in a greater way. And that's worth it. That's really worth it to me. And I pray that God places people in your path as you're ready to care for, as he cares for us. Thank you.